Microsoft bought Bethesda.
Microsoft bought Bethesda.
It finally
ZeniMax.
Yeah, Microsoft bought. Cal Ripken Jr. is getting paid.
That's right. Robert Altman. That's
right.
That other guy.
Yeah. Who's that? It finally happened, man. Like how many E3s has it been that the rumor every single time popped up? Like you will not believe who Microsoft is buying at this thing.
You're right. Yeah. Like and then it's like they're picking up Capcom.
Right.
Oh, they're getting Konami's IP.
Yep.
They're doing this. They're doing that. You know, like that the talk about what Microsoft is thinking about getting and all that other stuff. And here it is. Okay, Brad, maybe you might be the only other person other than the person involved, you might be the only other person that thought this as I did. But the first thing I thought was, does this mean John Carmack gets to interact with id properties anymore? And sure enough, John Carmack was out there saying like, hey, Microsoft doesn't seem to fucking hate me.
Wait, is this the John Carmack tweet of the week?
Definitely.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
Oh,
sorry.
100%.
It's in the running for tweet of the year.
Yeah,
he seems bullish on this situation. Yeah, actually, like that's how big this is, though. That was the first thing that I realized about this was not Microsoft owns Doom now. That was like, the fifth thing I recognized off of the back of this.
Yeah,
as insane as it is to say, especially in like a '90s context, that Microsoft owns Doom. It's not even the big thing about this, right? Like I don't even know where to start.
It's a long. Start at the price, $7.5 billion, which is a lot of money.
Yes,
I'm pretty sure that's a lot of money.
It's almost a lot of money.
That's almost twice as much as Disney paid for Lucasfilm and Star Wars.
Yeah, I was about to say.
To put it in perspective.
I would, you're getting Doom and you're getting Quake, so that's already better than anything Star Wars has ever done.
It's
so
like $2 billion right there.
Yeah, you throw in Wolfenstein, you throw in Wet, like you're good.
Evil Within, anyone?
Sure. But then you throw in some of Fallout into that.
Some of Fallout, yes.
PlayStation.
You're very carefully placing elements from Fallout in there. You're not throwing it in.
PlayStation 5 exclusive Deathloop.
Yes.
Anyone?
Yeah.
Jeez. So Microsoft put up a blog post on their thing on the Xbox Wire, talking about this, and like. It is a good reminder that Bethesda is more than just Bethesda. Obviously BGS, Bethesda Game Studios, is the big one, but id Software, Arcane, Machine Games, Tango Gameworks, Alpha Dog. Anybody?
Is Alpha Dog a mobile studio? There was a studio that was doing that Commander Keen game that I think got killed.
Might be right. Alpha Dog, Roundhouse Studios, ZeniMax Online Studios, who I think is involved with Elder Scrolls Online. Is that right?
Alpha Dog Games does mobile stuff. They have a game called Monstrosity Rampage that looks very much like they're trying to make a bootleg Rampage. Okay. Like the title screen and font treatment and all this other stuff is like, I don't know if the game is anything like that, but this splash screen on their website sure does look like they wanted to make a fake Rampage game.
It's got Rampage right there in the name. But
it's
not the first word, so I'm sure it's
totally legal.
Circumventing.
They also make Wraithborn.
Wraithborn. That's not a real thing. Come on, you made that up.
That guy looks like a very buff Witcher man with no shirt. Wraithborn.
It's like 2,300 people work across all those studios, so it's a pretty big thing. But shit, man. Like
dude. Shit, man, and dude. Here,
like it's hard to know. Like
I've down the news.
Yeah, I've got a couple other stories in association with this. Like Phil Spencer was out there doing the rounds yesterday. I mean, there's so many considerations around this. Like I said, Deathloop is currently a PS5 console exclusive. I believe Ghostwire Tokyo also is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes, I believe that is the case.
Or were those timed exclusives? Like, I mean, that's a bigger topic we'll get into. But like, the meaning of exclusive is hard to nail down recently in a lot of cases.
It's always around the turn of a generation. It is when it is at its least meaningful. But I feel like the term exclusive has been garbage for a lot of years.
Sure. I mean, here's the big one. Honestly, like, the big question from everybody is like, what happens to the next Elder Scrolls? What happens to Starfield, which is the game that studio is working on before they get to the next Elder Scrolls?
Right. Yes. And that's the the Bloomberg interview
Yes.
where he says,
Yes.
we'll take other consoles on a case-by-case
Yes.
basis when it comes to those games.
Yes, Phil Spencer did a bunch of press yesterday, and he would only commit to Starfield coming out on Xbox, PC, and Game Pass.
Wow.
Yeah.
We'll take other consoles on a case-by-case basis. So Starfield, the next Bethesda Game Studios game not confirmed to come to the PlayStation. Like, that's like...
Well, think about how broken those games were on PS3 and... but it's interesting going back to and they themselves kind of invoked the roots of Bethesda and Microsoft. Like Bethesda's track of like going from, hey, we make a bunch of PC games, check out this Terminator game, and hey, these Elder Scrolls games, they seem popular, to like the fucking super publisher that they are now. Like that all started with like Morrowind. It started with Oblivion, really. Like Morrowind was the thing that was like, oh, it's crazy that they were able to make Morrowind run on an Xbox. It's a bigger, more expansive RPG than you're used to seeing on consoles. But like Oblivion on the 360 was like, I think, their breakout moment.
Totally.
And everything from there has just been crazy. Like seeing Bethesda go from what they were to what they are now, and having that as the inflection point. Like it's a really wild before and after story, and then going on to do what they did with Fallout and getting the rights to Fallout through hook or crook or both or whatever it was.
I still remember Morrowind coming out on PC, and like I couldn't run it. Like I literally did not have the specs in my machine to run it playably. Like it was this weird boutique like systems heavy RPG that like only super nerds were into. Like nothing
totally, and
nothing against those people, but like it was not a mainstream developer in any sense.
No, and like Morrowind, like that exposed a lot of people to that type of game that never would have ever considered seeing it or playing. My wife's a great example. Like she is a huge fan of Morrowind. Like she had an Xbox back then, would never play games on a PC, and was always a console person, and she went from that to Oblivion to Skyrim to all that other stuff, but like just like fell into Morrowind in this huge way that like you're just like it's not a common way to fall into an RPG of that depth.
Yeah.
You just don't think about it that way, but like they managed to make that stuff. By the time Oblivion came out, they made that stuff accessible to console players. I think Morrowind is actually like when you go back and play it, even on Xbox, you're like, this is insane. Yeah. Like who would do this? This is crazy. And that afforded that. Like think about that. Like Bethesda grew in such a way with the games that they were making, the games you think of as the BGS games, the Todd Howard games, whatever you want to call them. Eventually put them in a place where they bought id.
Yeah.
They bought id, man.
id. Yes.
It didn't buy them.
Yeah.
They bought it, it's.
I still remember where I was when I saw that news. It was in the Sausalito basement. I was just like, it was just like this fucking the world stopped for a second.
Yeah, totally. And then and Bethesda grew into trying to become more of a publisher, right? Like they made a very concerted effort one year where that was the trip I went to London and had a Texican Whopper. And also they showed us Rogue Warrior and Wet and some other stuff.
How did it feel to fly halfway around the world to see Rogue Warrior and Wet?
The Whopper was pretty good. It had a little like taco pocket inside of it. And so it was it was a Whopper, but then it had this little, it was like a Jack in the Box style taco thing in the middle of it. And that was pretty good. And the whole Mickey Rourke thing, all the April Fool motherfucker, like all that stuff just was all immediately just like, this is what the fuck are they doing? Yeah. But they took a stab at it, and those games weren't hits, but it gave them the experience needed to go start doing more and more of that stuff. And I think they maybe gained a bit of a rep in not such a great way, depending on if you ask anyone at Human Head about some stuff around things, like the way that some of the external developers got treated along the way and some of that stuff. They, you don't always hear great things, but they kept growing and growing and growing. And
so that's an interesting angle on this, because like I would say maybe the most common sentiment about this deal, or at least close to the most common, is like this is kind of an anti-competitive move, like they are just throwing their insane amounts of money at exclusives, keeping games that people love off of other platforms. But,
it's a highly competitive move,
or anti-consumer.
Yes,
is what
no,
I mean.
yeah.
You know, like it's there is a PlayStation contingent that may not benefit from this situation, right?
I mean, Bethesda's the only publisher that's ever accused me of being anti-consumer. So in some weird way, that's probably
fair. Well, I mean, that kind of maybe illustrates the point. Like, it's possible that Microsoft is going to do right by those internal studios there more so than they have to date.
I would. Hey,
based on that,
we'll
history,
see.
Based on that history, when you mention stuff like Human Head and I think Arcane maybe had
some of the Arcane stuff. Yeah.
Tough to say how things have gone internally there, but like Microsoft seems to be committed to like building up a stable of developers and treating them well and letting them do good work. So
right. And the on the Microsoft end, it's interesting. Like you think about like when you want to do something new, and that's something that, you know, like a company like ours or whatever, you know, it's like, hey, are we going to build this thing or are we going to buy someone else's thing? And Microsoft right now is doing both. You know, like they're building brand new studios, they're building that Santa Monica team, and then they're like, oh, by the way, we're also just like dropping all this money on all these different studios and bringing them.
Changed up their strategy a little bit with Game Pass, right? Like the ecosystem is now more important than the games themselves in a way.
Totally.
So.
And we should point out they did, I believe, confirm that all Bethesda games will be on Game Pass day one, just like all other Microsoft stuff. So
that alone, like even, you know, exclusives aside, like that alone is a really huge get for them. You know, it's probably not a $7.5 billion idea, but like that is really strong.
Like those games are bigger than anything else they can throw in that category, right? Like Microsoft does not have that another exclusive.
And coupled with wasn't last week when they announced that EA Play is coming? I mean, just look at like how many new games are going to be in there as of the last 2 weeks.
Well, remember the EA Play thing is the basic tier, not the day one access to all of EA games tier. It's the vault.
What's the difference there?
You don't get new EA games on day one. That's stuff that they consider like in the vault. So like Mass Effect and Burnout.
Anthem made its way into the vault quite quickly.
Weird.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, but yeah, it's not like day one access to all of EA's games, though. I think you could still maybe upgrade to that tier if you want. And who knows, like, you know, how long does that deal go? Does EA stay in long term? Like, you know, there's always going to be stuff like that. The Bethesda thing is a purchase. That stuff is there.
That stuff's permanent. But I mean, that is the Netflix model, right? Of like stuff comes and goes. That's just on them to make sure every time something goes, something else takes its place that's just as good.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
it's a interesting. It's a crazy move.
Yeah.
It's a crazy huge swing. It's some left field. You just wouldn't expect it. It's very hard to. I certainly would not have seen this coming. Like, you know, even when we talked about like, hey, what companies would Microsoft think about acquiring, and the other different rumors, like, you know, like Capcom was on that list until Monster Hunter World came out and kind of dragged them up in such a way where they were like, oh, actually, we don't need to do this anymore. At least that was the thinking. That was the story. Is that maybe Monster Hunter World kind of saved that company?
Seems that way.
But, you know, so it was companies like that you were like, you know, Capcom was a little down on its luck in that period, and you could see an acquisition. Konami doesn't make a lot of games anymore, so you could see them being interested in dealing the IP.
Right. So yeah, it was a lot of like who's on the ropes and who has something valuable that they, you know, would offer something to Microsoft. But
Bethesda didn't seem like they were fit that category at all. Bethesda's like, hey, we've got a strong lineup announced, and our games are hits, even if a lot of them don't ship in a great state. But hey, we got this stuff coming, and they seemed like they were in a pretty good position. But, you know, hey, you know, everyone's got founders that maybe want to cash out someday, and blah 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 blah. So
I did see the idea floated of like how much longer is Todd Howard at Bethesda now?
It's a fair question, honestly. I mean, all of the long timers, right? I mean, anyone who's been there a really long time, you know, I would assume Pete Hines has some form of equity in that company, right? Like it would make sense. So yeah, a lot of them probably get put on contract for some amount of time post acquisition, and then they can stay or go.
Yeah.
You know, and they will probably be making quite a bit of money along the way, you would assume. And so they might not need to stay.
Right.
They might go out and start something new and do it all over again. I think, that's a pretty common thing. Or they might just get out of it, get out completely and just brew beer all the time. Like Dr. Greg did.
Yes, stranger things have happened for sure.
Yeah.
So Jason Schreier at Bloomberg managed to scoop this news by what, like a minute or two, I think. Like he got his story out like right before the Xbox Wire posted.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think that's what the timing was.
It was early enough that I think I came to it maybe 20 minutes late, and I was up very early. So yeah.
But one tidbit in his story that he posted is that Game Pass has gone from 10 million subscribers in April to 15 million now.
Wow.
So that's literally adding 5 million subscribers in the last 6-ish months, 5 months, something like that.
Is that including PC Game Pass along with the console?
So I would assume, yeah.
It's probably just everyone who is subscribed to some form of Game Pass.
That would be my guess, yeah. But
jeez.
I mean, that thing.
But they did.
Granted, a lot of that comes down to the pandemic. People are stuck at home and looking for like some valued bundle of games to play. But still, like that thing is taking off like a rocket, and who knows how high this is going to go now? When it's like, hey, you could play the. Granted, it's not the next Elder Scrolls, but it's the next game from the people who made Skyrim.
And that game's not out this year, like it's funny because, people were like, oh, people were joking about Xbox not having games. Now what? Like, none of those games are shipping in 2 months. I don't know what the fuck. No, this doesn't change anything right now other than making Game Pass like a more attractive proposition.
Right.
But like, dude, you own 5 copies of, if you can hear my voice, if you're within the sound of my voice, you own from 3 to 8 copies of Skyrim by now.
It's true.
That's not.
Yes. Okay. Does the review build, which is a separate product on Steam from the retail build that I have, count as a copy?
Yes. Okay. And I'm sure everyone out there has that as well.
Okay.
So, that stuff is I don't want to, I don't want to, downplay it too much. I think that's a fucking great deal for them. Yeah. At some point you go like, this is a big company getting bigger, and who knows. When does that become too big?
Yeah.
But it's a power move. I look at it and go like, God. I look at it and go, God damn.
Yeah.
Like, for as much as we talked about Microsoft trying to get their shit together and hey, they're acquiring these studios, like every acquisition they've made up to this point hasn't felt like this.
Yeah.
And I think it's it's a smart move on their part. Like, I can't break down like, is it worth it for that price? Like, I'm not your number crunching guy, but they don't make this deal if they don't think they can make it work, right? So it's big shit.
Chad asks if we think that there's any chance they can use this to drive Game Pass onto PS5, which I don't know, man. I don't know.
There's no. Go ahead.
There were the
Jim.
rumors to try and bring it to like the Switch for a while, right?
Right.
Yes,
right.
yes, that was floating around for quite some time. It sounded like Nintendo ultimately was not feeling it, or couldn't find a way to make it work to their satisfaction. But
yeah,
I mean, that would be a different situation where you're basically just leveraging xCloud. Like that is just a conduit to a streaming service, as opposed to like PS5. That would be a situation of like these games are maybe getting ported to PS5 because of this deal, or because the service is now available. Like,
well, it's what about yeah. I'm trying to think if there's, EA Play is available on PlayStation and Xbox. Like, that's finally available across the board. It's available on Steam, all that other stuff. But I don't know. I think you go back to that quote about, games appearing on a case-by-case basis. I think you'll see situations where like, hey, maybe it makes sense for them to keep Elder Scrolls Online up to date on consoles. And of course, Microsoft puts Minecraft out everywhere because it's Minecraft. It's a game that they have a great reason to put it out across the board for the types of people that play that. And Ori came out on Switch. You see those sorts of things along the way where they've made those sorts of decisions. But like, I think they could do that on PS5, because ultimately, if you're coming out and saying, hey, we're going to sell these games, it's the same deal as Steam, right? It's hey, we're going to sell these games at full price on PlayStation 5 If you bought an Xbox, you could have just got Game Pass. And hey, you could still do that if you want. Like that's not the worst thing in the world to be able to kind of Trojan horse your Game Pass stuff or to show the appeal of the Game Pass stuff by putting those games out at full price elsewhere. But I don't think they'll go that route. I don't think they'll put most of these games out on PlayStation consoles. Switch is still kind of this weird neutral territory for Microsoft, and I could see them maybe doing something along those lines. It's more likely that they would put stuff on a Switch than it would on a PS5, for sure.
Sure.